Hey, how's it going, everyone? Happy Wednesday, and welcome to this very special edition of our Wednesday broadcast. We have our first episode of the Happs Community Takeover, led by a wonderful, brilliant team of scientists here from a variety of fields. Hosting this amazing takeover is Dr. Deanna Hooper, a theoretical physicist who many of you probably know. Why don't we invite Deanna and the rest of the crew on screen right now? How's everyone doing out there? While they're coming on, just want to say, oh, Carrie's in first today. Good to see you, Carrie. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, everyone. Let's wave. Yeah, this is awesome to have such an amazing, accomplished group of scientists and experts here with us today. Wild applause. Thank you, Carrie. That's what we need. That's what we need. Andrew in second today. Awesome to see everyone. So Deanna, why don't you introduce yourself a bit for those who may not be familiar? And I'm going to actually, for a change, take a bit of a backseat. I'll be right here in the background off camera, but I am not going to spoil the takeover element of this. Without further ado, Dr. Hooper, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. Thanks for letting us do this. And, it's nice to take over the Happs account. We'll try not to break anything, but as scientists, we can't really promise anything. So sorry if we break anything in advance. So thanks for setting this up, and thanks to everyone who's agreed to join me on screen today. This is going to be super fun. So for anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Deanna Hooper. I'm a theoretical physicist specialized in cosmology. And within cosmology, I focus on dark matter, weird type of matter in the universe. I try to figure out what it is. Very specialized topic, very fun topic, but enough about me. Let's see who else we have here. Maybe we go around clockwise. Isa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Isa Betancourt. I host what I call the Bug Scope here on Happs and multicast it out to other platforms too, where each week I take viewers on a virtual field trip into the world of entomology. Sometimes we take a look at things that I find right in my backyard to museum specimens, and then sometimes I bring on experts from outside to join us on Happs to share their expertise. Like yesterday, we talked with a tick expert. And I'm a curatorial assistant of entomology at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. And I'll be going to Borneo next year as a Fulbright Nat Geo Storytelling Fellow. So great to be here with all of you guys.
Okay, awesome. I was about to go clockwise and everything just moved. Okay, now clockwise. Christian, over to you.
Christian Sasse. I'm based here in Kelowna, British Columbia. We have a beautiful day, and really what I like to do most is be outside. So I do both wildlife and actually astronomy. So it's a nice mixture. And I'm really an experimental physicist by background in optics, so optical light scattering. But I've diverted into many fields throughout the years, and it's been a lot of fun. And I think this whole panel will be a lot of fun, especially the collaboration.
Definitely looking forward to see what we come up with. All of us here on screen, bound to be good. Ian, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ian McLaughlin, and I have a PhD in neuroscience. And my research focused on mapping out how specific neurons in a part of the brain, in all of our brains, that have been there for 350 million years, not in a human brain necessarily, but on some brain on Earth, how those neurons contribute to anxiety, stress, depression, as well as addiction. And I've been talking about the brain with people outside of the discipline, in some cases with fellow scientists, for now several years, exploring topics that are directly related to addiction and psychiatric conditions, as well as just how the brain interacts with its environment and the story of the human brain and consciousness. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, going to be fun. Thanks. Abyss, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abyss, long-time commenter, first time broadcasting in Happs, especially trying to take over on the broadcasting level. I'm an engineer by training, by trade, and I also dabble in data science. So pretty much I'm very much interested in all science and STEM-related fields. I have I've done research regarding human body modeling and biomedical optics, but I'm generally like, the group of people that I see right now have piqued my interest in different fields. So I'm really interested in participating in this panel, and then so it's been a great pleasure to be part of it.
Yeah, great to have you here as well. So many different topics up here on the screen. It's great. Georgia, over to you.
Yeah, so my name is Georgia O'Terry. I'm a PhD student at University of Michigan. I'm a wildlife biologist. And I'm particularly interested in how people and humans are impacting wildlife. And so I use a bunch of different tools to figure that out. I look at genetics to see what kind of like rapid evolution is happening. I put trackers on animals and see where they're going. And I've put out like microphones to record areas to see like what kinds of animals are using an area based on their calls. So specifically, I mainly study bats. So I've done a lot of collaborations with people who sort of have expertise focused on other animals. And yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you here. It's so cool that you focus on, human-environment interaction. I think today that's such an important topic for everybody. Okay, David, you're last up.
Hello, I'm David Dunn. I currently teach astronomy at community college here in Northern California. Back in my PhD days, I did planetary science, specifically Saturn's rings, looking at it not with optical telescopes, but with microwave telescopes, a very large array, for example, and did modeling and tried to understand how the rings scattered light and so forth. So now I'm kind of just teaching. It's 18 and a half years now at a community college, so I've been doing that, and so I'm kind of into public relations and stuff like that. I do planetarium shows when I'm actually on campus, not for the last year and a half, but when I'm on campus and so forth. Yeah, so I like talking about astronomy on Happs here. So.
Yeah, I mean, you made the comment of you're just teaching. I think you can never say just with teaching. It's such a huge endeavor, and it's a big thing you're taking on there. We're moving around again. Okay. So we've ignored everybody in the comments. Hello to everybody in the comments. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being here. Someone just asked if we could all just make a comment, say hello in the comments, so everybody can find an easy way to follow us. So feel free at some point just to say hello in the comments so everybody can follow us. So we have quite a broad scope of scientists on screen here today. It's excellent to see all of these different fields. We will introduce ourselves as focusing on one thing or a subset. Like I'm a cosmologist, but within cosmology, I focus on dark matter. It's kind of hyper specialized. This is something that we see a lot with scientists today, where we focus on one thing. And of course, if we think back to historical scientists, one that comes to mind, of course, in this field is Da Vinci. Da Vinci was an engineer, he was an architect, he was a designer, he was an inventor. There's also a lot of historical precedents of scientists being polymaths and focusing on many, many topics. So I want to know everybody's opinion here on why now we are more hyper-specialized and whether this is a good or a bad thing. Feel free to take it away, whoever wants to address that comment.
You started with like a really intense question.
It's starting off high.
Yeah, I guess like the first thing I would have to add is that like I think hyper-specialization is a big disservice oftentimes. I think to some degree maybe like the direction Western science has taken, where you're expected to make like a lot of papers oftentimes, and so that can take pressure away from expanding what you're looking at and keeps you kind of like working in this thing that you know how to do.
So in neuroscience, I think some scientific disciplines have been around for quite a long time, since the beginnings of when we called our discipline science, right? Before it was like natural philosophy. Whereas some of them are relatively new. And I think neuroscience is probably one of the younger disciplines. And it is young because it's fundamentally interdisciplinary. And so before we started this broadcast, we were talking about how, certain members of certain disciplines can feel as though they can explain everything. But the benefit of having, an interdisciplinary approach is that you have a team. For my research, I worked with a physicist, an engineer, an organic chemist, an electrophysiologist, or, a different kind of physicist, basically. And so as a result, you can ask questions that are at the boundaries of these disciplines and you don't risk that sort of specialization, the downside of that specialization, which of course also has advantages, but yeah, that has been my sort of exposure to, specialization.
Yeah, I've had a rather interesting background because when I did my PhD, I was really specialized in experimental light scattering. So that was a very specialized field. But I was lucky because I had an internship in Berkeley, and and it's often the people that influence you in your life that can change your life for decades. And that was in the case with me because I had a very smart person at Lawrence Berkeley lab, and he showed me a lot about light scattering first. Just looking at phenomena that we have in nature. So we started looking at the iridescence of, well, bugs, Isa will like that, and fish and many other things. And we quickly found out how complex these things are. And then, of course, you go into the universe, and you see all the scattering that's going on in the universe. So you quickly diverse into so many different fields. And I've been enjoying that. I don't think I've become a lot wiser, but I've become a lot more curious. I still feel like in the first days where I was a small child, looking out for all these things to discover. So that's my view.
I think it's also the thing that in the past, perhaps it was easier to know a lot about quite a few topics, but now we're at a stage where we have so much in-depth knowledge about physics, about biology, that it takes many, many years to become a specialist in one topic. If you wanted to become a specialist in lots and lots of topics, as they did in the Renaissance, it's more time than we have, it's more studying than we have time for, unfortunately. But I think all of you already brushed up on this a bit, that this does mean that we can sometimes lose the bigger picture. And I think I noticed that especially in cosmology, because I'm focusing on high energy physics, and I have collaborators who are more particle physics, which is also high energy physics, and you think there would be so much overlap. And sometimes it's like we're talking a different language to each other. So I think sometimes it's also we focus so much because we have to, but we are sometimes missing this broader perspective. I think someone else was about to make a comment on this just as I started talking.
Yeah, so I was going to probably talk about this from an engineering perspective, because in engineering, we kind of apply most scientific applications. And so in ways, at least like from my experience as chemical and biomedical engineer, that's technically what I've been trained in. I see the scientific methods kind of being constantly been implemented in a way that you're right at the intersection of trying to go in any direction that you want. So I think like that's one of the fields that kind of affords you the flexibility to take over, or at least like to take on some of the scientific challenges, but by sort of like expanding your ability to kind of problem solve. And again, I have huge respect for scientists because there are daily breakthroughs and in all scientific fields that that are making differences in our lives and an understanding in ourselves and environment and the universe in general. So in a way, we are essentially benefiting from that knowledge, not just just as a part of the humanity, but also someone or some group of people like engineers like myself that try to aspire to sort of utilize these new tools into making new discoveries and making new tools.
I think that's a great point, and it also just plays in with the comment that Joel just made in the comments here, that math is a common denominator. And we do have a lot of common tools. We all rely on the scientific method, of course. Even, I think once we get past the jargon when we're talking to each other, we can actually really find the similarities in our approaches to work and in the methods we use. So I think this leads me nicely into the next question that I was going to ask, of what do you think we can gain from having scientific collaborations across many disciplines? What can we gain from talking to each other, from trying to cross this bridge to other disciplines?
I think one thing is that we can get to answers to big questions faster. So one example I think of that's something that is studied across different fields is the study of altruism and sort of like social decision making. So if you think of like the prisoner's dilemma, that's like big in the like social sciences, but we study the same thing in evolutionary biology. The evolution of altruism is the same thing. Basically, it's a big mystery given that all these species and individuals are competing against each other. Why do we have behaviors like altruism? What's the evolutionary benefit of it? And so it's interesting to see how different fields, unfortunately, have come to similar conclusions sort of separately. I bet that they could have gotten there faster if they'd worked together, maybe instead of treating it as such like a strange thing. I think biology could have made progress faster if they'd looked at some of the work that other people were doing. And there was actually a programmer, speaking of like the maths and stuff like that, there was a programmer who he made all these computer programs that basically had different behaviors. Either they tit for tat, they just did what the other program did. So if the program was aggressive towards it, it was aggressive back. And if the program was nice, it was nice back. And so he compared like all these different models. Another one was just to be aggressive. And like even just in a very simple computer simulation, we can see the benefit of cooperation and altruism. So.
And then Georgia, yeah. So I'm familiar with that literature as well. And there's the Pavlov model, right? And certain models just tended to win more than others. And it's almost as predictable as a mathematical algorithm, which is interesting.
Yeah, and like as an example of how biologists were just so confounded by this, people for a long time, vampire bats have been used as kind of the poster child of a species that has a lot of cooperation and altruism within it. So vampire bats will starve to death very quickly if they don't get food. Like they can starve to death within a few days if they don't get blood. And so other vampire bats, if one bat is hungry, other vampire bats in the colony will actually throw up into the mouth of that bat to feed it. And so for a long time, it was a mystery. They were like, oh, well, why would they be so nice? Like, it must be that if you cheat and you don't beg, and you don't hunt and you're just lazy, then eventually the other bats will pick up on it and they'll punish you and you'll get kicked out. But they have yet to be able to induce cheating in the lab, like induce punishment of a cheater in the lab. So if they regularly withhold food from the same bat, the other bats in the colony will keep feeding it. And they'll even do all kinds of weird things, like they're not smart enough for mazes, I don't think, but they'll like do like weird, they'll put in extra effort to get to that bat that's hungry and feed it. And so I think that biologists kind of took like a very circuitous route to coming to a very simple understanding in some of this stuff.
So one of the topics. So there are a couple people here with whom I've collaborated in the past, and look forward to doing so in the future. And one of them is based off of the upcoming cicada manifestation that'll be happening that's happening right now. And there's a bunch of interesting things that happen there. And of course, Isa of course has a cicada. But one of the interesting things that happens is that there are fungi that have evolved to exploit this periodic swarm, and they spread, they only infect the 13 and 17-year-old periodic cicadas. It's a long, complicated story, but the fungus essentially very dramatically, radically influences the behavior of cicadas, such that they tend to be driven to be sort of, their libido is driven nuts, and they tend to want to reproduce more. And sometimes they'll end up reproducing with, it's typically male cicadas. They'll end up reproducing with more male cicadas. And it just to spread this fungus. And it totally disrupts their ability to actually reproduce. And that's just one example, right? There's the Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, which is like the ant zombie fungus, which does kind of similar things, but basically it radically influences how ants behave, such that the fungus can spread more effectively. And there are plenty of pathogens that do similar things in humans, rabies, Toxoplasma gondii. But it's the relationship between insect or bug, behavior, and what is essentially neuropharmacology, right? To understand what these fungi, what these pathogens are doing within the nervous systems of these ants, of these, these bugs. That's kind of critical to understand, what's going on in the natural world. And so without that collaboration, without that interaction between these disciplines that don't normally intersect, you can't really ask the more interesting questions, at least from my perspective.
I think there's a very, very interesting example that I found in wildlife. I was really surprised to see it's not even as complex as anything else. It happened here at Tsawwassen, so that is near Vancouver. There's a region where a lot of herons nest, right? Herons, these big birds, right? Herons, and it became a mystery why these herons would all nest around an eagle's nest, right? Actually, the wildlife biologists here misinterpreted it first, because eagles usually would go and feed on the young herons, so they would be the predators on them. So it turned out to be that this is a very, very interesting symbiosis of herons and eagles, because eagles are very territorial, and they will not nest close to each other. So the typical distance between two eagle nests would be about a mile or so. So what the herons found out is it's much better if they build their nests around an eagle's nest, because that is like a mafia that keeps you protected, and thereby they will sacrifice only very few youngs, and the rest will actually flourish that way. And this was an amazing discovery. So there are a lot of things that we are discovering about wildlife, that are around us that we didn't even know before.
Yeah, this is an example of where we were talking earlier about how it's kind of funny how sometimes physicists think they can solve everything. This is an example where if you're a physicist, some, where you would be really easy to come to the wrong conclusion without working with a biologist who actually knows something about like those animals, like in a deep sense.
Isa, I think you distracted a lot of the viewers when you brought out the cicada. People are saying you always have a bug around to just bring out as a prop.
Gotta always be prepared.
Yes, always have your cicadas. And a few people in the comments told you not to eat the cicada.
It'll definitely happen at some point, but not on this broadcast.
Not on this one, but I think a lot of us want to see that.
Okay, I'll let you guys know. This is where there'd be a good collaboration with a chef, an entomologist and a chef. So if there are any chefs out there, then on Happs here, let me know. So, yeah.
So we've already discussed a few cross-discipline collaborations and projects going on, and we have lots more we can discuss. There's one that I was reading about recently. I'm not sure if Ian and Lisa want to comment on it, about a neuroscientist turned entomologist who's studying bee behavior and how pesticides can actually affect the brains of bees, and how that might explain the decimation of the population of the bee colonies. Either of you two know much about this? It's one that caught my attention, but I don't know enough about the topics. Isa, Ian, neither of you jumping on this one?
I'm not super familiar with this.
So I mean, no, so Deanna, I did not read that article. However, one of my favorite neuroscience professors in college started out as an entomologist. His name was David. I can't remember his first name. Last name was Kopp, Professor Kopp. That's what we called him. And he started out studying butterflies. And he had some crazy stories of what. And this was an older guy. He'd been probably got his PhD in the 80s or the 90s or whatever. And so he wanted to understand how certain motor dynamics of the butterfly wing operate. And so that took him all the way into electrophysiology. So just for anybody who's unfamiliar with what that is, you're basically poking microscopic cells, single cells, right, that you definitely can't see with your eyes. It's difficult to even see with a microscope, with a little guitar string, kind of smaller than a guitar string, a human hair, something the size of a human hair, that enables you to listen in on what those cells are doing. And he helped to understand, to contribute to the fund of knowledge, which is what the goal of any scientist is, to understand the dynamics that govern how it is that butterflies flap their wings. And so that kind of thing, I don't want to be, a huge neuroscience chauvinist, but that's not an unusual story in neuroscience, where you have somebody either, enter into the discipline from something that's completely unrelated, or you have a neuroscientist who just decides, you know what, I'm not going to call myself that anymore because my questions have nothing to do with neuroscience. I'm asking about bugs, or I'm asking about something totally different, paleontology or something. So that kind of cross-pollination does happen, pretty frequently within neuroscience. I think we're privileged in that respect.
Oops, I think Deanna dropped out.
So we know that Deanna does have some internet difficulties. And so, hopefully we can adapt on the fly. But so David, we haven't heard much from you.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I'm curious how you feel. Your experience as a astronomy professor. Did you have any thoughts on this cross pollination between disciplines?
Well, I mean, when you're doing a project or really trying to get into a project like what I was doing with Saturn's rings and how previous data was taken, of course, you start looking at other papers, right, and getting other ideas and what people have done. And occasionally you'll get to a point where you say, well, we're not really an expert at this. We're not an expert at this instrument or whatever. We need to talk to people that can actually use like the very large array and so forth. And that can inspire ideas of what you can and can't do with certain instruments. When I actually was a postdoc at Berkeley as well after my PhD, and so I talked to some people there, and we took some data of Saturn's rings using a different instrument with a smaller wavelength, and that was something I couldn't do unless I had the opportunity to talk to other people. So it wasn't totally like I talked to an entomologist, and that gave me a great idea about how to take more data of Saturn. But I do think the different disciplines, people are really hyper focused, but what they're doing is not completely incompatible with what you're doing. Their methods can be quite similar. If anybody is in science, they don't know the Monte Carlo method type of studies here, random processes. I mean, and that applies to so many different disciplines. And so that methodology can be used for so many things. So yeah, it's nice to be able to be able to go down the hole and talk to somebody about something a little different that you haven't thought about. So, and I've got a meeting right now, so I got to go. So sorry.
Thanks for rescheduling the meeting to join us for half an hour. We do appreciate
yeah. So
it.
I got to go. I'm glad you got me to speak because I was sitting here interested in all your other stuff, but I really wanted to see the brain and the universe thing because I've heard about that comparison before. So, but I'll see the replay. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here, David.
Bye, David.
So I guess as David just brought it up, and we were talking about astronomy in general, I guess we can jump into the brain and the brain and the universe one, which is a great comparison. So let me just bring up the image. Maybe Ian, maybe you explain one half of the image and I explain the other half.
That works for me. Do you want to pop it up?
It should be on screen now.
Okay, so I guess I'll say my half of the image is an image that I actually took. And so this was an image that I took with a microscope. That's the byproduct of a virus that I made that infected a bunch of neurons that are just sitting in a dish, okay? And what this virus does is it causes neurons that are just quiescent, that are just, silent. They're not firing impulses. They're not doing anything to churn out a green fluorescent protein, which is why all these neurons are green. Okay, but if they fire an impulse, if they fire an action potential, call them in the biz, if they're communicating with one another, they begin to turn red. Okay, and so this was a technique that I was able to use to determine when and where neurons in the brain became active. And so I'm looking down at this petri dish under my microscope, and I'm looking at this image, and I think this is something I've seen literally hundreds and hundreds of times, and I'm just like, this looks familiar. And these comparisons, this looks familiar, and I feel like I've seen something that it's reminiscent of something else. And at the time, I had been friends with Deanne, and at this point for probably 2.5, maybe even 3 years. And I remember, it's the web of matter or the web of galaxies. And so I just put these two images together, and it's not a perfect comparison, obviously, right? But I think you can begin, we're pattern-seeking primates, right? I think you can begin to see some sort of, similar patterns that just spontaneously form, right? It's not like I influenced the distribution of those neurons. They just grew there like grass, right? Just like a garden of neurons. They just grew there in that way naturally. And then, and they reminded me of an image that I think Deanna could explain far more articulately than I could.
Yeah, so the image you see on the left is actually a simulation of how matter clumps together in the universe. So every bright dot in the image, every tiny little pixel that is bright represents one galaxy. And you can see that these galaxies naturally come together to form this cosmic web structure. The very dark patches are the spaces in between the galaxies. This is something that our simulations predict of this is what the universe should look like. We have a lot of very accurate data that shows us that actually this is exactly what the universe looks like on large scales. So there is this cosmic web, and we kind of have an understanding as to how it comes together and why it looks the way it does. But at the end of the day, it comes down to this is the best structure for it to form. It is the most energetically favorable, is what we usually say. So it's just one that comes up often in nature. And I actually had a similar experience reverse to what Ian said. I joined one of Ian's broadcasts at some point and saw one of these images, and I took a screenshot of it, and I think I tagged you in Twitter, Ian, saying, this looks familiar to me. Yeah, seeing it side by side is amazing. And obviously we're not the only ones who have thought about this. There was actually a study recently done by a cosmologist and a neuroscientist where they tried to see is this just similar by eye, or are the structures actually similar? And they did several different analyses to actually see how structures form and see if these structures just look similar by eye, or if the way they come together, the nodes, the grouping, if it actually is similar. And they found that it does really not just appear visually to be similar, but it is really similar. The overall way these things clump together is ridiculously similar.
Yeah, so this is going to be a topic that I think Deanna and I will be able to talk about in greater depth in the future, just because there is something to the fact that this is just one example of similar structures in biology and in the broader universe. Like if you were to look at Lichtenberg figures, which is basically the pattern that like electricity imposes upon various materials like wood, for example. If you pass some electricity over wood, you see these beautiful patterns. And, I think a lot of those same sort of pattern-seeking primate predilections would be satisfied. And so fundamentally, when it comes to those electrical discharge patterns, we're talking about the pathways of least resistance, quite literally when it comes to electricity. And it's more complicated, obviously, when it comes to the neuronal projections, which is what you're seeing on, in the green side of this image. And I imagine it's more complicated in astrophysics, but the similarities of folks in science, as well as, folks outside of the discipline, folks, in the chat room right now, can identify. That's been a topic that's been discussed for a while. And, Deanna brought up that paper. There's a great paper from 2014 by Antonio Miguel that explores specifically the fractal characteristics of neuronal architecture and how it's reflected at various domains of science, of nature. And a fractal is just this self-similar object, right? And it repeats itself at various scales of resolution, right? Various domains of what you're looking at, whether it be planets or cells, right? And this is true like in the alveoli in the lungs, right? The little structure in your lungs that enable you to suck oxygen from the air. You can see a similar type of pattern. And then there's the golden mean and the plants behind me. You can't see them right now, but these repeating structures. And so, the fundamental dynamics seem to apply to all of these various domains of nature. And that kind of consistency is not only like aesthetically pleasing to us, which is an interesting topic, at least to me, but it's beautiful. And it's functional, right? There's a reason that we see these familiar patterns of various domains of science.
Just remembered I needed to unmute myself before talking. Seems to be a common thing we do here on Happs. So yeah, I think these images side by side are amazing, and I'd love to do a broadcast with you one day, Ian, where we just talk about this, because I think we could both go on about this topic for a very long time. So moving back a bit more to the natural sciences, of course, we've already talked about many different cross-disciplinary ideas and research and things like that. And Georgia, you brought up a really interesting one before. If you want to talk about that one.
Yeah, I will talk about that. First, I'll interject that I guess is kind of a link between like sort of basic patterns in biology. Alan Turing, the code breaker, he was like a famous code breaker during World War II. He actually made some really important contributions to biology as well in predicting how he came up with some equations, not really knowing that much about biology. He came up with some equations for how we could get a lot of different animal patterns, like leopard spots and stripes and things like that, just with the interaction of, by like patterns of interactions of just like an activator and an inhibitor. I don't know much about it, but like that's another cool example of like looking into patterns, I guess, and finding something cool. But I guess the other biology example I'll bring up, which is more closely related to evolution, to what I do. Sorry, scrolling around. So a lot of, I want to go big.
I think we both try to do the same thing at the same time. I'll leave you to do it.
Okay. So I went away. Okay. So like a lot of methods that we use in evolutionary biology can be like, actually, could I let you do it? Sorry, I just did it and now it's not going back to big. I don't know. Yeah, so we can use, so like our DNA, our genetics is basically a book, right? Our DNA is like A, T, C, G, and we have all these different nucleotides that make up the story of us. So if you were to take all of the DNA that makes you, it would be a book that's like 250,000 pages long, something like that. But other people have taken this, they thought, letters. It's not that different from a story, right? So we've used these methods that evolutionary biologists have developed to figure out relationships, to figure out evolutionary trees of life and how different species are related to each other. And we can use that to figure out, how are different languages related to each other? Or in this case, how are different versions of a story related to each other? So stories change over time. And you know this maybe if you've heard like a relative or something even repeat the same story and it changes over time. But in this study, they looked at different versions of the story Little Red Riding Hood. And so every dot on that map is, I presume, someplace that they recorded a version of Little Red Riding Hood, a version of that story from that area. The dots in Africa, I believe they don't even call the story Little Red Riding Hood. There's a story called like The Children and the Wolves or something, and it's like unclear whether or not it's even really part of the Red Riding Hood family, but they decided to include it in this study. And then by analyzing those stories with the same methods that we use to look at species DNA to see what their relationships are, they were able to look at the relationships in a sort of quantifiable way between the stories and see how they were, different versions were related to each other. So if you look on this picture, you can see like the different dots of the different colors on the right, they tend to cluster together. So, presumably the first like purple version of the story, right, it spread out into other similar purple versions of the story. And there's geographic clustering, right, because the story is spreading through connections between people, which also tends to be geographic. Especially presumably when the stories were getting developed. And so like the cool thing that they were actually able to find in this is that if you look, like the blue stories are from Africa are clustered together, and they are indeed part of that Red Riding Hood story group. They did sort of originate from like the same basal stories. So it's a way of showing us that yes, not only do we think these stories are similar and maybe came from each other, but like when we analyze them, we can see that, yeah, they really are. So
I think that's a super interesting example because I think it's a story all of us are familiar with some variants. So it's a really nice example to really see how you can use this in different techniques from one field in another. So I want to go on to Christian. You also wanted to talk about a specific thing, and we have a video which we can play. I'm going to put the video full screen, and maybe you can explain what we're seeing.
Right. So we are very blessed with wildlife here. So I'm actually interested in both physics, turbulence, and also wildlife, especially the flight dynamics. What you see here is one of two types of hummingbirds we have here, Anas and Rufus hummingbirds. That's a male hummingbird. And I filmed this in my garden with a high-speed camera. So what's happening here is, first of all, just looking at the flight of the hummingbird is a sort of a hybrid between an insect and a bird, because the wings follow an eight pattern, so they fold backwards and forwards, and they cause very very interesting turbulence that give it the possibility to hover. And the second thing that you are seeing here with the cuvette, I built a special cuvette here, and with a macro lens. It again, Diana, just I don't know if you can run it again, because it was just let's see. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so watch the tongue now. What's interesting about the tongue? It's a bifurcated tongue, and originally scientists assumed that it was capillary. It was actually capillary action that would attach the droplets or the liquid to the tongue, and that was completely wrong. It turns out to be that the tongue is bifurcated, and I've got a lot of footage on this. And if you look very closely to it, you can actually see that the tongue consists of very small rolls, microscopic rolls that are rolling in the fluid at an incredible speed. And that is a much more that seems to be a much more efficient adhesive method of trapping the liquid than a capillary motion is, which would take much longer. So these are just beautiful examples that we can learn. And in order, for example, to study the turbulence that a hummingbird causes, which is really complex, by the way, and is not fully understood, even if you look into the scientific literature. What I'm building up at the moment is a so-called the Schlieren optic. Some of you may be familiar. It's basically a large mirror that looks at the turbulence in the air and makes use of changes of what we call density, thereby refractive index in the air. It's quite a difficult experiment to build up, but what I'm hoping to do is to get a hummingbird in between there and actually make the turbulence visible, which is really difficult. I don't want to put smoke or so in, because that wouldn't be very nice to the hummingbird. So I'm trying to find non-intrusive methods for doing that. I haven't seen anybody do that so far with a hummingbird, but it's an experiment that I'm building up, and hopefully in a few months I'll be able to show you some results. Yeah, that's basically it.
This is absolutely incredible. Your footage is always so amazing. I would just recommend everybody to check out Sasa's Twitter page and YouTube channel for more footage like this, because honestly, your videos are just absolutely mind-blowing. I could watch them for hours.
Thanks.
You mentioned there that, of course, you would like some non-intrusive ways of doing this without harming the birds. I guess that's where you would really need an entomologist or a biologist more than an entomologist, sorry, to help you with how you can actually go about studying these birds in a way that is safe for the birds as well.
That's right. I already talked to Isa, so.
Nice. Maybe you can do a joint broadcast about that one day.
And by the way, I just want to say about Georgia, bats interest me incredibly much, especially the flight and their incredible mobility is fascinating. So I was always wanting to find someone who knows more about bats, so maybe we can have a conversation.
Yeah, I would love that. I know some other people who are studying bats and their mobility. Actually, they were interested. Some people were interested who designed drones and stuff like that. They were like, how do bats avoid crashing into each other? A lot of times they're flying very densely when they're all coming out of the cave at the same time or something. And so they're like, oh, if we knew how they avoid crashing into each other, we could put some automated thing in the drones so that the drones don't crash into other things or each other. Well, the scientists I know studying this, they were like, oh, okay. And they got a bunch of money to do it. And then they found that the bats crash into each other all the time when they're flying out of the cave. They're just very good at recovering.
Wow. But their wings are very interesting, because obviously they have bones in their wings, right? Which gives them a lot more stability and possibly maneuverability, right?
Yeah, they have a lot of maneuverability. Just like with birds, there's a trade-off between how short and stubby your wings are and how maneuverable you are, versus like if you're a hummingbird, you're very maneuverable. If you're like a hawk with these long pointy wings, you're very efficient glider, but not very maneuverable. The same trade-off as in bats. But they, unlike birds, they have a lot of finger bones, right? Yeah.
Yes,
so
finger
birds
bones,
have lost, over evolutionary time, they've lost a lot of the bones in their hand wings, and bats have maintained all of them. So yeah, they're very flexible.
Fascinating. Thank you.
I love the comment there that bats basically crash into each other, because now I feel like I can relate to bats because they're as clumsy as me. So I'm happy with that. The knowledge that bats smash into each other is very, very nice to me. So I think there was one more topic we wanted to mention in terms of specific examples of multidisciplinary research. Of course, we still have other topics to discuss as well. But Abyss, you wanted to discuss one specific topic as well?
Yeah. So I think like currently there's a big interest, and rightfully so, in the study of AI. But what most people don't probably are unable to realize is that it was closely tied to our understanding of the brain, or at least like our initial understanding of the brain, because the first type of machine learning or AI were actually designed after a neuron, which is called perceptron. So that's essentially where it started. But if you are very familiar with what Google did with the AlphaGo, if you guys remember, this is actually one of the top Go players. His name is Lee Sedol, and Google actually, or at least like DeepMind, which is now being acquired by Google, was able to beat this person in a game of Go, which is presumably the most complex human games out there. So we're right now at the very explosion point. But what I want to sort of emphasize is that how this field actually started and how closely tried to follow findings on neuroscience. And it was largely inhibited by computational limitations, because if you look at under the hood, something that produces Go would look something like this, which kind of adds to the complexity that Ian and Deanna were talking about, essentially, because right now we can afford all the computational abilities to essentially produce, successful generations of the different neural architectures. So this is what we call the deep Q learning. It's one of the deep reinforcement learning techniques out there. So yeah, and also I would like to also mention that there's a lot of mathematics involved, and I think that will be the first guess of everybody here. So again, like if we try to zoom into this, although it's not probably going to look like what I just described, this is entirely different architecture. But what we're doing right now is trying to analyze an image. So pretty much like how our eye operates, right? Because we can identify edges in our eyes, and then those edges will be kind of like kind of deciphered into some kind of details. If you look at a car, it could be like sort of the wheel of the car, or the hood, or the the framing. And then the deeper you go, that you have more abstract but yet fully formed information about the car. And this is what it's actually showing you, that at first you're inundated with a huge image, and then you further reduce it in size and eventually become this abstract layer where you can essentially represent a bigger model into a smaller one. So this is something akin to how our visual system actually develops, or needs to be able to detect on that. Ian may be able to say more about that, but yeah, I just want to emphasize that there is a lot of merriment of application of AI into different fields, whether it's astrophysics, cosmology in a way. There's also, like I said, there's a big entangle with with neuroscience, and also it's trying to go into different fields. And try to get some kind of accessibility there. So I just wanted to mention, how AI is actually sculpting our future in a way. And these are very specific examples that I would like to discuss, that I brought to discuss here. Thank you.
So Abyss, yeah, I mean, I think this is a topic that I really love, and I think we can bring us all back to the screen. I'm not going to be referencing any of the images that Abyss was nice enough to share. But so I actually saw the founder of the company who made AlphaGo, which is this artificial intelligence, give a speech at the Society for Neuroscience in 2017, and he gave the keynote speech. He's this pretty small guy, soft-spoken, named Demis Hassabis, and he actually he had training in cognitive neuroscience, and so he developed this artificial intelligence that just destroys everybody's expectations, even within computer science. And computer scientists tend to be pretty arrogant in terms of what they're going to be able to pull off. And so, basically the whole room was just agog. But the reason I love AlphaGo and I love their approach, and the reason that I think this is a great example, and I'm glad you brought it up a bit, of the, very intimate relationship between computer science, artificial intelligence, and neuroscience, is that AlphaGo operates not just like, but very, very similarly to the way the dopamine tree in your brain, in my brain, in every primate's, essentially every animal's brain operates. And that is error correction. So you make a prediction about something, anything. It doesn't even have to be like, an answer on a test or, the correct answer to a question. It could be, I'm reaching out for this pen and I miss it, and that was an error. And so you have a spike of dopamine as you're reaching for it. I mean, not a big spike if you're reaching for a pen. A better example would be like placing a bet in roulette or something. You have this spike of dopamine, right? And it feels great because you think you're going to win. And then something happens. The outcome happens. And either you are correct and dopamine begins to decline slowly, or you lose and you have this valley, this depression of dopamine, and it feels like depression. And that's essentially how they tuned AlphaGo. It was a self-correcting, iterative process that was and he made this comparison. Demis Hassabis, the founder of DeepMind, he made this comparison. They intentionally based their strategy on the systems that evolved in our brain over, hundreds of thousands, when it comes to the human brain, but millions of years when it comes to kingdom Animalia. And so, these disciplines are directly related. And the conversations that can happen between members of these disciplines can be very interesting, particularly after a couple beers. But anyways, great example of this.
I think it's always fun that we have a lot of fun conversations and a lot of scientists follow up with it. Can be even more fun if we throw in beers. And we definitely need to do this again one day with a bit of alcohol flowing as well, and see which tangents we go off on. So welcome back, David. Glad you could. I don't think you should drink your hand gel, really. So welcome back, David. Glad you could join us again. So we've spoken a lot about, in terms of research, because of course we are all researchers, we've spoken a lot about how we can bring together research from different topics and how we can have these great collaborations. Of course, we are all also science communicators. That's what we're doing on Happs. We like doing science outreach, sharing science with everybody. So I want to shift the focus now slightly towards outreach itself and science communication. Isa, given your background and your training in communication, I'm going to direct the first question to you, and then of course everybody else can jump in as well. So what benefits do you think there are of bringing together people from different fields in terms of science communication?
Yeah, so I've definitely seen some really fun examples of cross-discipline events happening on social media, or thanks to social media. And I think it can be so much fun because one thing that's can be really great about cross-disciplinary collaboration, or like talking about these topics or your topic with someone who's in a whole different field, is that, well, first of all, you're not going to use the jargon that you might use with other people in your field. So already that conversation is more ready for a more public or general audience, which I think is really cool. And then also, it can, there's a lot, analogies are really fun in science communication. And so when you're thinking about it from different directions and different perspectives, you can come at something in some really creative ways. And one example that I think is really fun, where two different worlds collided on Twitter to come up with some exciting findings, is when I think it was an astronomer on Twitter, someone in the astronomy world, discovered how a jumping spider was chasing a laser on the wall. And they're like, oh my gosh, who would have thought that this jumping spider would even see a laser like this on the wall? They got really curious. So Spider Twitter was drawn into the conversation to see what was going on. And this ended up in this big, long thread, this big conversation where, right there on the spot, one of the arachnologists, Nathan Morehouse, he calculated, right then and there, live in the threads, the ogre-eyed spider, which is the spider that makes a web, and drops it on its prey in the middle of the night. So it has these huge eyes and catches its moving prey under starlight, like pitch black conditions sometimes. And maybe I guess the moon helps, I'm sure, in some cases too. But he calculated that that this ogre-eyed spider was able to see the Andromeda Galaxy, which is a galaxy that we're only, correct me if I'm wrong, able to see out of like the corner of our eyes, I think, right? Go ahead, David, if you want to add to that.
At a dark site, you can see it with your eyes. It's one of these faint fuzzy things. So yeah, the faint fuzzy stuff you tend to not see as easily directly when you directly stare at it. But if you get to a dark enough site, you definitely can see it as a little fuzzy patch in the sky. But it takes dark sight.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. So with this conversation, it ended up these astronomers ended up bringing this arachnologist over to give a symposium at their university. I think it was like over on the West Coast. And so I think there's a lot of fun to be had, and with these cross collaborations and the mixing of minds that's often facilitated through, well, in person, but I think the power of social media and broadcasting and this documentation that happens from the internet is that these things are shared and then they sit and can be discovered by many different people. And then these cool mix-ups can occur where, like, how else would these wonderings have come to be or come to arise? Like, it might not have happened otherwise. They wouldn't necessarily have been in the same room. So
yeah, I think there's definitely a lot that can be said about social media. But before we get so much into that, I'm curious if anybody else has software that's important in terms of outreach of bringing together scientists. My personal take on this is that while we do all come from very different fields, we do have a common background and a common set of knowledge, which is the scientific method. We're also all familiar with a lot of processes within academia itself. I know very recently and me came up with the potential rant about the publishing industry in academia, which we won't go into today, but we do all have these shared experiences. And I think that's also really important in terms of doing outreach, is to show people how we all follow the scientific method. Even if we use a lot of jargon sometimes to hide it, we all are basically at its core doing science, and we're doing it in the same way. And I think when we go about doing outreach, it's very important for people to see different perspectives, and sometimes even to see them together, to see how different fields might approach the same problem or different ways of explaining the same issue. So I think it's definitely an advantage in terms of outreach to bring more people together. Let's see if anybody else has comments to add there.
Yeah, I just want to add something, because I think also scientists can go much further than that, because if we look at just the beautiful images we saw on the universe, and also what the one that Ian even took himself there of the neurons, it shows that these beautiful patterns are actually very artistic. So I think there's a lot of outreach beyond science, and I think this is where science and art and humanities can come together, and that's something I'm personally very interested in, because a lot of people who cannot associate with science do recognize the beautiful patterns, and we talked about fractals, these patterns that we see everywhere. And I think that takes a lot the scare that people have of science, and we have to avoid talking in really complex jargons that put people off, because if we do that, we lose them in the first sentence. So I often believe that these visualizations, whatever visualization we use, and we already said we're forced, even among scientists, to drop our jargons and to talk in simple language. And if we go beyond that, we can reach out to the large community, especially with art. I've noticed that just looking at beautiful patterns that you can take of the Milky Way and just present them in some way draws a lot of people. They suddenly get very interested in astronomy, which is wonderful. They never thought about it, and they just happen to have a bad science or physics teacher, and suddenly they see, well, there's nothing bad about science. And so it's just another way of reaching out.
Another thing, Deanna, you brought up that we do all sort of develop this kind of sense of communitas, right? Because we all kind of go through similar, we feel the same contours throughout our experience moving through science. And one of the things, like jargon is one of those topics that I think is scary to folks who've never engaged it. But once you're in a scientific discipline, you recognize that there's nothing magical to knowing what dopamine is, what it means. It's just a word that represents something. Right. And so, a whole vocabulary, a whole language about the universe with which I'm completely unfamiliar. But I also know that, you're just using words to represent things. Right. Oh, that's the word that you use to represent this thing. It doesn't make, anybody a brilliant genius because they happen to know a bunch of words. It's just like, experts in the Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or Dune or whatever. Yeah, you know a lot about a specific set of language, and so it doesn't make you a genius. It just makes you, it just demonstrates that you spent a lot of time learning that language. And so I think scientists, when they're speaking with one another, that barrier of anxiety or self, a lack of confidence dissolves away because we all recognize the same thing, which is just that we have our languages and we can communicate once we understand what the words mean.
So Isa already brushed up on this a bit, and I want to ask a question that hopefully all of us can answer a bit here. We've already seen how important it is for scientists to come together, both in terms of research and in terms of outreach. Isa mentioned already about Twitter and how you can have these opportunities that you might not otherwise have. I ask, what do you think a platform like Happs can do to help with these collaborations between scientists? Feel free to jump on it. I'm just throwing it out there to whoever wants it.
Well, I think Happs is the perfect platform. I mean, we can see how it has progressed. I mean, you have to go back a bit historically into Periscope, where many of us come from, how difficult it was there. And then they introduced the platform where we could start talking to each other. And Happs has taken it to the next level now. They have the possibilities to put in just what we were trying to do, put in some pictures and so on to communicate with each other. I personally see lots of opportunities. I mean, astronomy is the first one. I'm just building up my telescope in my backyard here, and I was just thinking, Diana, I'd love to get you join one day. And as we walk through the cosmos in distances, going further and further back in history, it would be wonderful, for example, for you to comment on that and and show that really with in a live show. And the same goes for wildlife, of course. There are so many possibilities to build up experiments and invite experts. And we have two very prominent experts here. And David, I'm sure, when we look at planets, you were talking about Saturn rings and so on, which I've actually shown before in live. It would be wonderful to have your comments on that, because it's nothing more refreshing to people to have a type of David Attenborough comment in the background, and then you can fill in. So I see lots of possibilities. I'm sure I always wanted to go and visit Ian anyway. And then COVID came in, and I'm sure one day I'll be able to do that, and we'll think of something interesting to do there too. So lots of possibilities. Okay.
Drinks are on me, Christian. The moment you're here, drinks are on me, I promise.
Yeah, Happs is just so well set up for collaboration. And I was going back to Periscope. I was hoping one day they would make it so that we can bring on other people through video or something like that. But that never happened. But that's okay, because now we have Happs, and it's been so great bringing on other entomologists onto my BugScope platform. And yeah, it's been really fun. And yeah, I think there's so much potential with bringing other types of scientists onto to talk about, like Ian and I have been talking about at some point doing something with insect brains, and maybe at some point I can bring on someone to talk about insect flight, because I know that there are people out there who study that specifically. I know how flies are able to land upside down on ceilings, which is something that we don't know how to do yet with the robotics. So yeah, it's one of those things where entomology is like so interdisciplinary that it's hard to even think about. Like entomology, just entomology, is studying the natural history of something, I suppose. But so much of the entomology being done is like all of the interdisciplinary things like forensic entomology and seeing how old bodies are, or like agriculture. And that really involves plants. And then there's so much being done with biomimicry and like recreating the chemistry of spider silk. And so there's just so much potential there to talk about these things with other scientists and like fuse and manipulate in our minds the different perspectives and ideas that we come to the table with. And it can be done here on Happs, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think that it's great that Happs is kind of a small-ish community still, because something that happens in other social media platforms is that there's so many people there that it's really easy to just get right back into your own little subfield and echo chamber. And so it's kind of cool that that there are a medium number of people using Happs right now. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the thing about Happs that convinced me that, you know, I should really take a second look. You know, my initial familiarity with Happs was through its work with its use by journalists. It is the ability to enrich the content. I mean, Periscope had been around for, you know, years, and they failed to exploit just the simplicity of being able to show a picture, or for Christian being able to show those beautiful slow motion videos. You know, I was literally pointing a phone at a computer monitor with a readout of my microscope. So I was just losing, the picture looked like garbage, despite the fact that I was literally at the microscope. It couldn't get any higher resolution. And so with Happs, I could easily do that, you know, with a phone if I wanted to, directly. But I can also use it with a computer, which as an elder millennial, I rely on computers more than phones. But yeah, I mean, it is that ability to enrich your content with actual direct figures from papers, or, you know, primary material that you recorded yourself, you took pictures yourself, you know, whatever it might be. And the ability that ESA regularly exploits, being literally in the field with a mobile device showing insects. I mean, that is, I think, game changing. And so, you know, I'm hoping that the platform continues to grow, because the reality is these tools don't exist everywhere. In fact, they don't exist anywhere else. And so yeah, I'm excited. I really hope more people recognize the advantages that this platform provides.
I think for me, I mean, obviously you've all mentioned already the visuals, the collaboration. I think something else that perhaps really brings I mean, currently we have the 7 of us on screen, which wouldn't have happened anywhere else, right? This is something that Happs has made happen. But it's also a lot bigger than the 7 of us, because we're all multicasting out to our different socials, to different social media. You know, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on multiple Twitter accounts. So we're all reaching our usual audiences with new people. Like the people who follow me on Twitter probably follow for cosmology, and today they're hearing about entomology, about biology, about neuroscience, and it's really exposing all of our communities to these other people they might be interested in. And I think the fact that all of us simultaneously can send it out to so many places really does broaden what you can do with Happs. And to me, it's such a key feature, because we really feel like we connect to multiple people at the same time. Okay, anybody have some final comments about this topic of what Happs can do for us in terms of science collaboration?
Well, here's my topic. Many of you should prepare yourselves to be bugged, quite literally in the case of ESA, by me, for some ideas. I have some ideas for everybody, things that we could chat about collaboratively. You know, it was lovely to meet you, David. You know, we haven't really interacted very much in the past, but you know, I look forward to checking your stuff out more. And, you know, thanks for organizing this, Deanna. It's always fun to chat with like-minded individuals from different disciplines. And so, you know, I look forward to chatting with all of you in the future.
So let me just jump on that, because I want to actually now ask everybody in the audience, everybody following along, what collaborations would you like to see from the people here on the screen? And Christian already mentioned before, me and Christian have a broadcast plan together. I think Ian and me will do one at some point. A lot of us here on screen have broadcast plans together. So I'd like to know from the audience, what would you like to see us do together? Do you have any cool ideas where you want 3, 4, 7 of us up on screen? Let us know. Now is the time to give us ideas, you know, just shamelessly asking for ideas here. To those on screen, do you have any more broadcasts planned among us that maybe I'm not aware of, or maybe I've forgotten?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do. I don't want to monopolize the microphone here. But some that jump out to me is are exploring some of the finer details of how it is that fungi exploit the very simple but very competent and versatile nervous systems of insects. They evolved to do this, and even in such rare niches of like an organism that reproduces and explodes every 17 years. I mean, think about that. 17-year life cycle. You have a fungus that relies almost entirely upon that organism. That's nuts. And then
a very patient fungus.
Yeah, no kidding. But also an inevitability, evolutionarily speaking, right? And so that's something I'd love to chat with you, Isa, about. There have been several that I have mostly pursue with you, Isa. And then, of course, Deanna talking more about the sort of the manifestation of fractal patterns at multiple domains of nature. And, we sort of like just tickled that topic a little bit, in the beginning of today. But, there are many other domains and examples that I have that I would like to poke your brain over. And then I'm going to have some ideas simmering in my sleep-deprived brain for Georgia Christian and David, and then Abyss and I chat fairly regularly on various platforms. But there are many things that Abyss and I could wax poetic over. So those are just some of the ideas that I had coming into this conversation.
Yeah, that'd be nice. That'd be cool.
So maybe just to wrap up, if anybody has an upcoming broadcast they want to promote, not necessarily collaboration related, or if you have a collaboration you want to promote, I'm going to promote my own broadcast that I have already got distracted because it's already past midnight here. Friday evening, should be around 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific time. I'm going to have an artist and a scientist join me. I'm going to interview them. They've collaborated on a new project, bringing together the sciences and the arts. It's a really cool collaboration. I'm going to have both of them on my channel this Friday, just talking about how you can bring together science and art. Anyone else on screen want to promote broadcasts?
Well,
yeah, I've got. Go ahead, Isa.
No, you go, David. You go.
Okay. Trying to do a regular show on Sundays. The astronomy show, and this week I'll probably talk about the midnight sun. I had some other live streamer on a different platform who was in Iceland, and every time she was on, she was like, it's midnight, but it's bright outside, and people ask, why is that? And it's hard to explain that in text. I can't do it. So I'm trying to explain that, what's meant by the midnight sun. So sometime Sunday, probably 2 p.m. on Sunday. I'm not quite sure the time, but 2 p.m.
Pacific time, right?
Pacific time, yeah. So.
Cool. What a alluring topic name. So tomorrow I have my regularly scheduled bug scope at 3 p.m. and there'll probably be a bonus bug scope either that tomorrow night or on Friday, because I have a new dissection scope coming in, or my first dissection scope. The one that I use is from work, and recently, thanks, David. He's holding up the sticker for the bug scope, the weekly insect-themed live broadcast. And so I, from support from fans and followers and supporters and Patreon and everything, and even awards here on Happs, I crowdsourced funding for this dissection scope, which I'm really excited to get because it'll make transitioning to seeing the insects up close like way smoother. So I'm really looking forward to that. And so I'll be testing it out in the next couple of days, tomorrow night or Friday.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to do is I'd like to chat with maybe some of you all about science fiction, interplay between science fiction and what we actually as scientists know about science. So I'm a big science fiction fan, and science fiction is our vision of what science can contribute in the future. And some things are spot on, and some things are like, whoa, that's a big misrepresentation of science, like that field and what we know about it. So, this a lot of times for me, this shows up in when they're talking about genetics or evolution in science fiction, there's some common themes, I guess I'll say, of things that go wrong, and a lot of ways in which they actually capitalize successfully on what we know in our scientific knowledge. So I think that would be really cool to chat with some of you all about.
Yeah, I just wanted to say my broadcasts are going to be quite spontaneous. Spring to summer is the best time where everything happens in nature. So I'm going to be out in the field, probably showing a lot of eagles and osprey nests live, which is incredibly difficult, by the way, to build up the setup. Some of you who have seen to what excruciating, laborious walks and climbs I have to sometimes go to set up my equipment. But it's very rewarding because there's just so much happening. So just keep tuned. I probably won't have any announcements. Most of the things I do are very spontaneous because that's the way it is in nature. You have to be very patient. And yeah, so just stay tuned. Thank you.
Yeah, there are things that happen spontaneously. I mean, the eclipse wasn't spontaneous. I kind of prepared everybody, but I went on at 2:45 a.m. my time and broadcast the lunar eclipse. So, and it goes, Issa will find a bug in her onion or whatever it was, and hey, let's broadcast this because it's exciting to her. So,
the natural world full of spontaneity and things that don't fit on a schedule. So.
Okay, anyone else have anything more to promote or any closing thoughts? Now's the time for closing thoughts.
Well, I don't have upcoming broadcasts, but for me, I guess like it will take me some time to kind of prepare some topic that I would probably find, or at least like think that people would find interesting. So I did my first broadcast and about on Bayesian thinking. It was a really long time ago compared to now. But yeah, so I'm probably looking forward to like putting more broadcasts out there because like as you all mentioned that there's a sort of like a niche and yet very interesting group that's actually frequents the platform on Happs that is eagerly trying to just interact, not just interact, but sort of cooperate and learn from each other. So I'd like to at least like collaborate with with any of you. I know that Deanna, Ian, and Issa, we actually discussed about some scientific sort of like a panel discussion with fewer groups, fewer members, but it will be very interesting to sort of collaborate on larger ideas. So yeah, I just wanted to say at least like there's definitely a broadcast coming, although I cannot say with what certainty, but I'll try to do that on a regular basis.
My closing thought is I just got my daughter, my 2.5-year-old daughter, her first dissection scope. And so watch out, world. You may have a mad scientist on the way. So prepare yourselves. But otherwise, yeah, thanks again for inviting me. Great conversation, and hope to talk to you all soon.
Yeah, thanks, Happs, for letting us do this evening. Thanks, Deanna, for spearheading the organization and getting this going. It's been really great. A lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining along in the comments. Thanks to everybody on screen. This has been great. Just a quick comment before we close up. Make sure you follow everybody who was on screen. Sorry for the countdown there. Make sure you follow everybody who's on screen. Make sure you follow everybody in the comments. That's how we build up the community. Next Wednesday, I guess there will be another Happs takeover. So look out for that. Looking forward to seeing all the new collaborations coming up on Happs. Okay, thank you, everybody. I guess now we cue up the countdown. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
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 Cheerio, everyone.